Johnny from Crosscast over here, and I'm with a special episode with a special guest. Amazing woman next to me, Achinoam Harel.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Hello.
And when I started doing the podcast, I thought about doing it to meet and to get to know fascinating people and to learn from fascinating people. And our next guest is someone you should take a lesson about bravery and about courage and about how to plan your dreams right. And it's Achinoam Harel, and she just finished crossing Israel with a motorbike. And I believe might be the first to ever. You're the first
woman to
first
do that.
first woman to cross Africa with a motorbike by herself, right? Am I?
Oh, in Africa, no. In
No.
Israel, yes.
And the first Israeli woman to do it.
Yeah.
Am I correct about that
Yeah.
one? So,
as far as I know, maybe.
Yeah. So take us through it. I mean, like, how did it came about? Crossing. I mean, I'm a man, and you told me you didn't even know how to motorbike that good before you did it. I mean, wasn't that?
Yeah, I had about a year of experience riding motorcycle, and I had a KTM 125 EXC, which is a tiny little bike. And so I had no experience really riding bigger, heavier bikes. But I flew to South Africa, to Cape Town. This was last March 2016. And bought a BMW 700 GS.
That's a bigger bike.
It's a pretty heavy bike. It's 200 kilos without any extra equipment. So when I put all my gear on, it probably got to about 270
Whoa.
kilos, which is several times my weight. So just imagine when I dropped it, it was...
It's quite a task to lift up.
Sometimes I managed, sometimes I didn't. But it was a big, heavy bike. So I flew to Cape Town, bought a bike, and then rode up into Africa for 6 months.
And how much? Wow, that's fascinating. And how much time you got to plan this kind of road or to plan this kind of trip?
It took me a year to plan it. And so in that time, I bought maps and I hang them all around my office, and I drew red dots and lines all over the map where I wanted to go. And I talked to people and I wrote them and I read blogs and I read books and tried to plan everything as much as possible to have all the information I could.
And now people say, people here, like if you've done it for Europe, people say, "Oh, yeah, it's really good. That's a way to go." But if you say it through Africa, people say, "Whoa, are you insane?" It's like it sounds really dangerous because it's Africa. We don't know much about Africa.
Yeah. So we're very scared of other places in the world in general. So when I was traveling there and I told people that I'm from Israel, and maybe people hearing this podcast will, but when I told them I came from Israel, they were like, "What, are you crazy? It's so dangerous over there." And I don't feel like it's dangerous at all. So we always think maybe that the grass on the other side is much more dangerous and scary. And in Africa, I didn't find it dangerous. I found South Africa, which is the most complicated, complex, and developed country in Africa, to be less sympathetic. But the other countries in Africa, people were so nice and so good to me. They were very, very curious. They weren't threatening at all. When I would stop by the side of the road for a minute to check something on my GPS, let's say, then immediately 20 people were surrounding me. Or if I went into a gas station to get my tank filled, 20 people just standing there looking. They didn't want money. They didn't ask for anything. They didn't want to take anything. They didn't want to hurt me. They were just wanting to see what is this alien that had landed from outer space, because they've never seen a white girl traveling alone on a huge motorcycle. The motorcycle itself looks to them like a spaceship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to see. So they were very, very excited and curious and very, very good to me.
Wow, and it took you like 6 months to do it. So
Yeah.
that's quite of a journey. I mean, you have highs, you have lows, and you have like what's the feeling throughout the day?
Well, when you're on a mission like this, especially when you're alone and as a woman and in Africa, which you don't know as many things about, or it's not a comfort zone. You have to be very, very aware, very focused and on task. That's what I found. I'm a very task-oriented person, and so I thought I really tried to make sure I knew. So I tried to gather as much information where I want to go and where I can sleep, and ask people about the road, and maybe where I can fill up, and have food with me, and have water with me, and extra fuel. But you have to be all the time on point and make sure, because otherwise, I mean,
You can.
yeah,
Things can get,
you might get in trouble. You might have trouble, and it's a game. You have to take risks, but you shouldn't take stupid risks. So there are times when you have a choice. You can take the asphalt road, which might be easier to ride, or you might say, I want to take the off-road route because it's more interesting. The people will be the small villages that I can come across.
Yeah.
And there were times where I said, okay, I'm going to go the more dangerous or the more adventurous route. And there are times when I started down roads like that, and I said, okay, this is too risky, and turned around and came back. You have to play the game of knowing when to take risks and when not to be stupid.
Now you did it, and you actually came back to South Africa, but it was like a memorable moment during this trip. Like there was probably thousands of them.
Yeah.
But there was one that you can remember, or like one memory that comes up.
Well, the most touching experience I had was right at the beginning of my trip in Namibia, which is the most amazing and beautiful country, in my opinion. I had a pretty bad accident. I was riding off-road, and I got into a heavy patch of sand. The bike started waving around, and I very quickly found myself on the ground. Because I didn't know how to act right, I was at the beginning, and I did not have any confidence in myself or in the bike. So when I started waving around, instead of letting go and letting the bike straighten itself out, I immediately became very, very stiff and tried to brake and fell over.
Which is exactly what you're not supposed to do. It's like the opposite.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So one thing I love about motorcycle riding is it teaches you a lot. You have to rebuild an entire new set of instincts. We're used to, if we're scared or something, our instinct is to hold on and to stop and brake and let's assess the situation. And on the bike, you have to, exactly in situations like that, let go, be as calm as you can, and just give more gas.
Okay.
Give more gas and you'll get out of most situations. So I had a pretty bad accident. I got up and I saw that my windshield was smashed. One of my panniers was smashed, and the fork was crooked. But I managed to ride back out, and then I wrote about it. I wrote a blog throughout my trip, and a few days later, I got a mail from a guy who wrote to me, and he said, listen, I did the same trip 20 years ago. I've been reading your blog. Like, keep on going, be strong and stuff. And when you come to Kenya, to the Masai Mara, you're welcome to come be with me. So a few months later, I knocked on his door, said, here I am. I've got into the Masai Mara. And actually, I want to say throughout the trip, I was hosted by a lot of people and had the chance to stay over with a lot of amazing, amazing people. Who I got to the opportunity and the privilege to meet. And so, after dinner, we sit, we eat, we start talking and sharing each other's stories. And he told me that he was going through a rough period, was one of black period in his life. And he said that reading the blog really, really helped him get through and relive some of his glory days and a really good period in his life. And that was for me the most amazing thing. Not in the end, not Africa, and not the landscapes, and not the motorcycle, but the people that you managed to touch. And
that's amazing. That sounds amazing. I mean, to touch someone, to change someone, or let's say give someone a better feeling, I think that's quite amazing.
Yeah, I was really touched by him.
Now you finished the trip to Africa. What it feels like with the first, you get to back to Cape Town. Actually, that's the last place, and you feel like what? Exhausted, excited.
It
Relief?
was
What do you feel?
it was an amazing feeling to be back because I had started and finished at the same point. So when I got back to Cape Town, I actually had people there that had helped me at the beginning of my trip a lot. And so I was immediately, there was an amazing South African guy who helped me with everything. He's like a second father to me, who really took me under his wing and helped me. And so when I came back to Cape Town, felt like coming back home. And to be surrounded again by people with so much love, it was very, very exciting. But I have to say, I felt during this trip that you expect there to be huge highs and terrible lows, and you're sad and terribly sad at one moment, and other times you're euphoric. And I didn't feel like that. I felt like because I was on a mission, I had to be very focused. I felt like I couldn't let myself get into a panic if something bad happened, and so I was always very holding myself back to make sure that I didn't let myself break down, because I think you can't let yourself do that when you're in a place like that.
Wow. Then now you finished the trip with Africa, and you're coming back to Israel, and then you decide to cross Israel.
Yeah.
In one day, 24 hours.
So I came back to Israel and I bought a DRZ 400, which is a beautiful, tiny little. Well, it's not tiny, but it's a pretty badass bike. Mm-hmm. I love it. And I looked for the next challenge and what I could do on my own home turf. And together with my sponsors, who are the owners of the Suzuki dealership here, we decided to do another challenge, which was to cross Israel 24 hours on a bike. For me, it was very exciting because I feel like sometimes we have mental barriers, sometimes we're not even aware of. So for me, riding at night is something that I don't generally do. It's very dangerous. On the roads, maybe not as much, but off-road, it attracts a lot of animals, and especially if you're alone and something happens.
You're alone. Yeah.
You're alone. And also for me, it was the idea of also how far you can get, because mentally sometimes we have blocks on how comfortable we feel going. So even if we don't realize it, sometimes we're like, well, I can't go that far. It's on the other side. And so for me, it was very, very exciting to just get on the bike at the northernmost point and ride throughout the night, a very long night, it felt like, and have the sunrise, and then after several hours reach the southernmost part. Makes you feel like, oh, I can do this. It makes you feel very good.
That's amazing. And you afterwards you finished that, and a few days later you did it again?
Yeah, it turned out that exactly a week later, a group of friends was doing it, and so I tagged along, and again we did it, and this time in 17 hours. So next time maybe I'll be able to even improve my
12
time.
hours, 10 hours, you're getting sure.
Yeah. That's the goal. And it was very interesting to ride once by myself, and different challenges when I was by myself. I had a hard time with navigation because my GPS didn't work. The route was not perfect. The second time, the route, we were led by somebody who knew the road very, very well, so I had an easy time. And this is a confession. So I don't ride that fast. I don't mind saying that. I do not ride very fast. And these were four of the best riders, all of them big, strong guys. And so they left me literally in their dust. And this is not fun because my face was constantly covered by sweat and mud and tears because my eyes were filled with dust, and it felt like pieces of glass in my eyes for 17 hours. And then I had also to start riding faster because at some point there. And we took a slightly more technical, difficult route in the south, which was very interesting. We got a bit more enduro and a bit. So it was very, very interesting.
Wow. So what's the next challenge that you feel like that's up there on your bucket list?
Yeah, I think I have a next big challenge, which will be to ride from London to India. Mm-hmm. That will be when I finish my degree, hopefully. I'll take about a year. And my next small dream is to take my DRZ and put it on a ferry to Greece and ride around Europe for a few months.
Wow. That sounds exciting. And now, when you don't cross Israel and you don't ride through Namibia, what do you do on your day life?
So I'm a student. I'm studying to get my law degree and my MA in government, and I also kite surf. That's my other big hobby. So I love that. Yeah.
Okay. And when you sit down at home, favorite meal you like to have?
my my favorite meal is a pizza. I have to say pizza. I have to admit.
We got to the last part, and do you have any advice or tip you can give to our listeners? Like something you learned or something that you can be useful?
Yeah, so my personal outlook is that anything is possible if you put in a lot of time and effort in order to plan. Mm-hmm. It took me a year to plan my trip in Africa and 2 months to plan one day's riding in Israel. But I think from the side, sometimes bravery and stupidity look a lot alike, and the only way to tell the difference is the end result. Mm-hmm. But I think there is a lot you can do, and they're not exactly the same thing. So I think that my planning and my being very careful and being very informed helped me complete this. And I think that's also part of the fun, talking to people and learning from them and gaining from their experience. So if anybody has a huge dream, I think anything is possible. Put in the time and effort and you can make it happen.
Sounds good. Achinoam, thank you very much. Maybe now I can start calling you Achi. I don't know. We'll see. Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Crosscast, another episode. Time!